Como he dicho antes, no nos va a oír. Y ya está. Luego las preguntas se les retransmitirá por chat.
¿Sabes cuál es el problema de la mayoría de juegos?
Que siempre te marcan el camino con una flechita muy grande.
Exacto. Siempre te tratan como si fueras tonto. Habla con este, ve a ver eso, haz aquello. Imagínate ahora un juego que te suelta en medio de la nada y no te dice nada.
Eso me recuerda a Outer Wilds.
Justo ese. Y además, la forma que tienen de hacer de los fondos y demás es una locura.
Actually, creo que quieres deducir Modular Environment Art Techniques.
Justo eso. And we are lucky to welcome John Oppenheimer, a 3D digital artist who will be talking about modular environment art techniques, which will be in English. An applause.
Hello. Hopefully you can hear me. Me llamo John Oppenheimer. Daré mi presentación en inglés. Si tienen alguna pregunta sobre mi selección de palabras, mi español no es muy bueno, pero intentaré clarificarlas. Gracias. All right, so my name is John Oppenheimer, as I just said. This is my first time giving a talk like this on my own. So I'm sorry if I'm nervous. I'm going to do my best. Hopefully I won't stumble over my words or hesitate too much. Yeah, so my name's John. I'm a 3D artist at Mobius Digital Games. I've been working here since 2020. I was hired in the pandemic out of school. I mostly model environments, but I do some technical art. So I work on shaders, visual effects, that kind of thing. Because we're a small independent studio, I like to try a lot of different methods, wear a lot of different hats, as they say. So, I've even done a tiny bit of programming. And, I'm always just trying to learn new techniques. Essentially, I really like the overlap between artwork and technology. So I like to have a technical background. Another thing about me, I really like toast. You'll see this little toast guy a few more times during the presentation. Yeah, here is a small selection of some of my work. Some of these are personal projects. Obviously on the right, this is from Outer Wilds. And one last warning about Outer Wilds, if you haven't played Echoes of the Eye, the DLC, I'm going to show some things that are spoilers for the game. It will be presented mostly without context, so it's probably fine. But just in case you are intending on playing that, maybe don't look too closely at some of the slides. Okay, so here's some of my past work. When I was hired in 2020, I worked on Echoes of the Eye. I worked on that until 2021 when it released, and then we supported it for a few months after for patches, improving certain parts of it that might have been confusing for players, and just making sure that it was a polished piece of work before walking away. I also worked on the Switch port for Outer Wilds alongside Unity, who helped us out a lot. Outer Wilds runs on Unity, the game engine, and we were approached by Unity to make a port. And so they helped us out a lot with that. There's no way Outer Wilds would have run on the Switch without Unity's help. But so I spent a number of years working on that port, essentially making simplifications of models and optimizations. And then the most recent release that I worked on is a game called Bounty Star, which came out last year. It's not made by Mobius, it's made by a developer under our same publisher called DinoGod. And while we were between projects at Mobius, they essentially let me out to a different developer under the same publisher so that I could help out while we didn't really have 3D art tasks at Mobius. So in total, I've been working in the games industry about 5 years. I'm not super experienced or anything, but I'm learning, I'm doing my best. I only have experience with indie studios. And I'm working on a new unannounced project right now at Mobius. So hopefully I'll give a talk on that someday later in the future because I'm very excited about it. So quick explanation of how I got here. After I graduated high school, I studied computer science. I thought if I want to make video games, I have to be a programmer, right? That was just how I thought about it. So I went to a school with a computer science major, but it was a really big school. It didn't work out great for me, and I started to consider other options. Um, and that's when I considered maybe doing a digital art major. Um, so I looked around at schools that I could maybe major in digital art instead of where I was currently. Um, I visited a school called Laguna College of Art and Design. I really loved it, and I applied there. I was lucky enough to get in. Um, and at first, I thought I was going to be a 2D environment artist. I thought I was going to make mood paintings and characters and maybe concepts. But when I started taking my first classes there, I found, oh, wow, I really love 3D and I love 3D environments. And so for the rest of my time at school, I focused on 3D environment art with a little bit of visual effects. And I was in my senior year when I heard that Mobius Digital was going to be hiring for an internship and that they were going to look at some student portfolios for my school. I had played Outer Wilds. I really loved it. And so I was very excited about the opportunity. And so I was like, yes, please, like, put my name forward. Here's my portfolio. Um, and I eventually got an interview and was lucky enough to be hired as an intern. So I interned with a few other folks for about 9 months, um, and was eventually hired full time. So that's where I've been ever since. Um, I started off again doing environment work there, but as the environment tasks kind of started to dry up and we were closer to shipping the game, I branched out into some more visual effects, shaders, technical art kinds of tasks. Um, and I like to think that's part of why I ended up being hired because I showed that I could do multiple things. Yes, that's me. That's why I'm here. The thing that I want to talk about today, because I have done it a lot in my time doing environment art, is modular artwork. So, what is modular artwork? Um, Essentially, it's a way of creating a kit or collection of parts um, for a larger environment that's assembled from smaller pieces. The reason you would do this is because once you create the set of pieces, you can make, if you have a kit of walls, a kit of floors, a kit of roofs, lights, that kind of thing, you can essentially make however many rooms or structures or buildings that you want, as long as those pieces are good. So modular art is about creating those pieces. Um, One of the reasons I think it's really important, especially in an indie context, is you will probably be having to make pretty big things as an environment artist. Um, and as just one person, it can be pretty tough to manually author all of those. And so having a small kit that you can reuse and remix and change textures on, arrange in different ways, tends to be really helpful and lets you punch above your weight, essentially make something bigger than you otherwise could. Um, Another reason why it's useful is because, and I'll explain a bit of this later, but people who are not environment artists, like designers on your team, can hopefully use your modular pieces to prototype levels on their own, which means your team can go a lot faster and you have to worry about less transfer of knowledge, that kind of thing. Because the designers can already work with your pieces without having to tell you, like, hey, could I please have a room that's like 10 meters by 20 meters with, 5-meter high ceilings, that kind of thing. So, um, a way that I like to think about modular art is that it's kind of like creating a set of Lego bricks. So I put Lego plus Autodesk Maya plus Unity here because it's kind of like making Lego pieces in 3D to build your environment. Um, it doesn't have to be Maya. It doesn't have to be Unity. These are just the programs that I use at work. This could be Blender. This could be Godot. This could be Unreal. Anything like that. But what I'm going to talk about today is the foundations for how you will make a modular environment art kit. So here's some examples of some small things that I made. On the left are some, material spheres and trim sheets, that kind of thing. And then in the middle here are some simple assets that I made. And as you can see with these environments on the right, you can combine those simple assets to make a more complex looking environment, as long as you created, a good foundation, a good set of Lego bricks. These aren't too large. These are both interiors. That was the intent, to focus on materials. But, with just a couple pieces, you can make a lot. So I mentioned that modular art is like Lego. One way that you can think of it is, imagine that you have a set of specific Lego bricks. Let's say that it's these 7 bricks here. So imagine taking those bricks and making a building out of them. Nothing too big. Imagine using like 20 pieces. You can copy them as much as you want, but you're limited to these shapes. So for example, you have this 2x4 flat piece, you have the 1x4, you have the 2x2 brick. Essentially, this is your modular kit, and you are tasked with creating a building out of it. So I'll let you think about that for a moment. I'll move on to the next slide. You don't need to have anything crazy imagined, but just, briefly think about it. With those pieces, here's something that I made. I made a small, low detail castle, so it has castle walls, and I use this blue piece for towers, and it has a little central building in there. And of course, this is really simple, but I imagine whatever you thought of with these 7 pieces was probably something totally different. And the idea with a good modular kit is that you can make, a ton of different possibilities, structures, with just that simple set of pieces. And once you've made those bricks, other people on your team, especially people who aren't environment artists, like maybe a lot of you in the room, I don't know if you're environment artists, concept artists, writers, designers, audio engineers, anything like that. Once the environment artist makes that set of bricks, it becomes a lot easier for other people on the team to arrange them and communicate their ideas and even do stuff that's close to a final level design. Maybe the environment artist will come back in and add some props or refine the way the modular kit is used. But the idea is, once you spend the time making these bricks, which can be pretty time consuming, it empowers you and your team to make a whole lot of things without, having to make a whole castle from scratch. So we talked about Lego bricks. Let's talk about 3D again. So I recreated those same Lego bricks in Maya right here. I color coded them the same way, so you can see it's, the same set of shapes. And I arranged them in 3D, and then I put them into Unity. I scaled them up so it felt like kind of a castle size. So you can see here, I'm standing here with the game camera at kind of the entry to the castle, or here I'm on the top of it, the ramparts, or whatever you might call it. The idea here is that, the philosophy is essentially the same between making something with a set of Lego bricks and a set of modular kit. Of course, this can be a lot more complex. I wanted to keep it simple for the sake of example and making it more transferable to the Lego analogy. But you can do a lot more than this. Okay, so I've explained sort of what modular art is. I want to talk a little bit more about why. These are some pieces that I did during school. This castle is one of my favorite things that I made. I'm really passionate about creating vistas and large environments. I really like Dark Souls, Elden Ring, that sort of thing. And I don't think I would have been able to make something this big without working modularly. This is a whole castle. And if I tried to make each of these towers, each of these gates and everything by hand individually, I would have run out of time and never finished the project. So the reason why I think modular art is great is because once you spend that initial time to build out your kit, and of course you can add kit pieces later, you can make something huge. There's no limit to the size of it. If you wanted to make, you know, a hallway that's 1,000 tiles long, you can do that, and it's essentially just as easy as making a hallway that's 10 tiles long. So modular art is flexible, it's reusable. An important thing that will happen as you're developing a game is probably the level design, and many other things about the game are going to change. And if you had hand authored, say, a hallway or a gate or a room to be one specific size, and as you're playtesting that level, maybe players are going through it too quickly or slowly, or they're getting confused by the layout, it will slow you down if you have to remake that environment from scratch. So if you build it modularly, it's a lot easier and a lot faster to make small changes like extending a room, one more tile, one more meter, um, making the ceiling higher, changing the layout. And this happened to us on Echoes of the Eye. We iterated on the level design a lot during development, but once the game came out, we found that players were struggling with some of the areas because, without explaining too much, you have to navigate in the dark. And you have to sort of have a memory of what the layout of the room is once you've turned out the lights and don't know exactly where everything is anymore. And that ended up being pretty confusing. So post-launch, we did a lot of changes to the level design. And because we built that level with a modular architecture kit, it was possible for the designers to be like, okay, here, here, and here, we need to change the sight lines. We need to make this bigger. We need to make this smaller. We need to make sure this path is more clear. Because it was modular, they had the power to do that. And that helped make the game better a lot faster. Another thing about it is you can just have unexpected combinations. To the environment artists in the room, if you've ever made a modular kit and given it to somebody, I'm guessing they have done things with the kit that maybe you didn't anticipate, which is sometimes funny, but also really useful. A modular kit is more than the sum of its parts. It can be a whole lot of things from just, 7 base pieces. Next, who uses modular art? This is where I'd put a bunch of pictures from some of my favorite games because modular environment art is extremely common, but I don't know that I have the rights to show their work. So if you squint really closely at any of these blurred images, maybe you can figure out what games they are. I really like these games, but again, I don't know if I can talk about them. But I can at least give some theoretical examples. So the majority of 3D video game environments are built with some amount of modular pieces. Some workflows, some games lean more on modular or on specific one-time handcrafted pieces. But the majority of buildings, structures that you see in games are probably built with a modular kit. And like I said before, once an artist makes that modular kit, it can be used by artists, designers, anyone else on the team who has engine access to create and prototype layouts. And part of the reason that that's good is that the less that work has to be handed off, so the less that like a designer is telling you, okay, I need this room with this size, then you make it and you give it back to them and you're like, actually change this, then you give it back and forth. If the designer can just grab your pieces and build it exactly the way that they want, and then hand it back to you for final polish, that goes a lot faster and it lets people translate their ideas a lot more clearly. If you've played with any kind of level builder or level editor, you probably have experience with modular environments already. Even Fortnite, for example, when you make a ramp or a wall in Fortnite, that is a modular kit. It's just a very simplified one. If you've worked with Forge in Halo Infinite, that has a bunch of modular pieces that you have access to. Housing in World of Warcraft, all these things that I'd love to show pictures of, but I won't. These are examples of games where the access to the modular kit is given to the player also. Another type of game that uses these a whole lot is if you imagine an isometric game, kind of like Diablo or Path of Exile, or any of those kind of isometric hack and slash games, their environments are procedurally generated. So there's a random component to those. And usually the random algorithm builds those based on modular pieces that the artists have created. So, maybe they'll create like a T-junction, hallway, an open room, a boss arena, a small room, a trap room, that kind of thing. And then those pieces are constructed modularly. So when the level is procedurally generated, they can be arranged in places where, like, let's say the doors match up. So you can flow through an environment that essentially the game created for you randomly in that moment. So yeah, modular art is really common. You'll see it everywhere. If you're a nerd like me and you like environment art, maybe next time you play a 3D game that you like, look around, see if you can see the seams between walls or floors or where the texture repeats. That might give you an idea of what their modular pieces are, and it can be really useful to observe that stuff in the wild. Okay, so let's look at a real example. This is a screenshot I took from the Unity editor on Echoes of the Eye. So obviously the building is not really these colors, but kind of like that Lego brick example, I colored each of the pieces so that you could see how they're being used in the building. So anything that shares a color, like these two red roofs are the same piece. All these blue walls are the same piece. These green railings are reused, that kind of thing. And once you have this kit, you can use it to create whatever kind of building that you want. And again, to the environment artists in the audience, you probably already know this. Hopefully the texturing section of this is going to be more useful to you. But to anyone who's not an environment artist, maybe even this is your first time hearing about modular kits, hopefully this is useful so you can communicate with artists about what you need. Okay, so let's look at we've seen the exterior for this. Let's look at the interior. So again, here's a little key of the pieces that we're using. You can see the floors are being used. You can see the walls and the stairs are being arranged in a way that matches up. And if I didn't have these crazy colors on it, it would look more seamless and well integrated, and a simple but believable environment. Here's another image. Spoilers here. I didn't want to show a puzzle answer in my slide in case anyone is going to play this. But so up in this room, which is the top floor, you can see that the designers wanted the ceiling to be a little bit higher, but not a lot higher. So we use this half height wall piece instead of the full height wall piece to raise it up just a little bit and then put the roof on top of that. So that's an example of where it's good to have a flexible kit. You wouldn't want to make an entire kit out of the smallest pieces you could imagine. Like, I wouldn't recommend building this entire building out of half pieces because one, the textures would repeat a lot, and two, it would take a lot longer to build if people are arranging these tiny little parts. But the small parts are really useful for creating transitions or fine tuning, that kind of thing. So you can see as another example, the roof pieces. The red ones are the end caps. So at the front and back of this building, the red, and then this magenta purple one is the piece in the middle. You can see more railings over here. You can see the stairs. And then, of course, anything that's not colored like the modular kit is props that we arranged on top of it. But yeah, so I just wanted to show this as a real example of something that we had made in Echoes of the Eye and how those pieces would get used. This is a slide that if you haven't played Echoes, maybe don't look super closely at this, but we made most of the DLC using these pieces. Some of these buildings are blockier than others. Some of these things are meant to be seen in the dark and have brightened them for the purposes of this talk. but all of these environments are created using a modular kit. Even this broken one, this burned one, we created a modular kit of burned pieces. So we had to be a little bit more careful about the edges with that one because, we didn't want like an intact wall being right next to like, a jagged burned thing because it wouldn't make sense. So we had to be a lot more careful about like the transition between pieces with that kit. But the reason I show it here is that a modular kit doesn't have to be all hallways and square rooms and rectangles. You can make a lot of different shapes with it as long as you're intentional and thoughtful about the way that things match up. And so, we've made large buildings, we've made, a village. Over here, I won't explain what this is, but it's made with a different modular kit that matches up with this one. So essentially, we have a lot of versions of the architecture kit in Echoes of the Eye, and we used it and reused it to make a bunch of different things. You can even see in here, for example, there's a like shattered rotten roof, and even the rotten roof pieces were modular. So anywhere in the game that we wanted a roof to be caved in or wanted to have roof pieces missing, we could reuse those modular parts. Those were created by a fellow intern named Kendra Dantone. They're awesome. I worked with them for a number of years, and all these were made by a team, not just me. But I'm really proud of what we did, and I don't think we would have been able to make something this big without a modular workflow. Okay, so we've talked enough about what a modular workflow is, why you do it. Let's talk for a bit about how you might make modular pieces. So this is an environment that I made not for any professional project. I think this was for a class that I was auditing. And here is the full environment on the right, and on the left and on the bottom are essentially all the pieces that I used to create that. So you can see I made a specific thing for the crane because that's more of a focal point, but the buildings and the floors, those are made with just individual tiles, small squares, that kind of thing. Right now, I'm just going to talk about modeling. We'll talk about textures later. But yeah, so you can see like this is a window piece. So that's over there. It's over there. It's over there. This wall piece is used here. The roof kit is used up here. Roofs are one of the hardest things to make with modular pieces because you have to match up multiple angles as opposed to a wall, which just needs to be flat, match up with the left and right, maybe the top and bottom. Roofs are a lot more complex, and so this is a very humbling experience to make these. But yeah, so just here's another example of a modular kit and the big things that you can create with it. So for an example, let's make a simple spooky hallway. Pay no mind to the toast ghost in the background. We're going to focus on wall pieces here. The floor and ceiling can often be, a tiling texture, very simple. In this example, they're just rectangles, just cubes. I'm going to focus on how I made the walls for this. So if you were to make a modular wall kit for a spooky hallway, the first thing you might want to think about would be grid sizes. How are you going to break that up? So for example, it's usually easy to work in squares. So maybe we have like, if we want it to be a big hallway, we have like 4 meter by 4 meter wall squares. We can make some smaller ones, but the base piece is going to be a 4 meter square, and we can repeat that to create a hallway. As you make more modular kits, you'll get a sense for scale. Something you might run into is that in first-person games, you tend to have to build a little bit bigger than you might expect because the camera is closer to things, the field of view is different from a third-person game. It doesn't quite translate to real-life sizes the way you might expect. And so while a standard game character that a lot of people might use would be like a 2 meter by 1 meter rectangle, if you make a hallway that is also 2 meters by 1 meter, which might be a reasonable hallway size in real life, it's going to feel incredibly cramped. So you might have to be a little bit bigger than you would normally expect. Okay, so let's start talking about the pieces that make this up. The most important thing, and I've repeated this image, when you're making a modular kit is to think about when the edges meet, how they're going to match up and hopefully be seamless. So I made this simple wall piece, and I highlighted the edge here to show that, like, the base shape of the wall is just a rectangle, but then we have this molding and this trim. And when we make other pieces that are going to match up with this so that you don't see the seams and it looks like just one continuous area, they have the same shapes here and the texture is seamless across it. There's no gaps in the model, that kind of thing. So for example, here, when I made my window piece, I wanted to make sure that this trim element, this little checkered area running along, was at the exact same height as the trim running along the normal wall. Same with the bottom of this. Or for the floor kit, I have this metal lip on the outer pieces. And so this is the exact same thickness as this piece on the corner, so that when you arrange them together, you don't see the gaps between them. They look like just one piece. So once we have that established, we have our silhouette edge that we're going to try, or well, not silhouette edge, you literally won't see it, but the edge that we're going to be matching up. We can start to make more pieces. So here's my 4x4, here's a 1x4, and then I've made some broken wall pieces as well. The intact edges of these are made to match up with my regular wall. And then these broken areas are only a small section of it. And I cut both of these off at the same point so that they can, be on either side of a wall or match up next to each other. And either way, it should still look somewhat seamless, like you can see here. And the reason why I show these broken pieces, kind of like I was explaining with the echoes of the eye examples, are that it's very easy to make a modular kit that just feels blocky, very rectangular, very square. I've been guilty of that myself. The things that will help the most with believability are things that break up those straight lines and go off grid a bit. They'll add a lot more variety to your kit, make it feel more organic. But of course, those are the hardest pieces to design because they're going to break your formula a little bit. So you need to be careful about where where they match up, how they match up, how you can use them with other components. So next, as another example, as long as your edges that we've been talking about, this trim and wall shape that we created match up, you can do whatever you want in the space between. So I created this kind of pillar with a light fixture. And because either side of that is my normal wall edge shape, I can kind of do whatever in between. And doing stuff like this will add a lot more interest and variety to your modular kit. Another thing to think about, I don't really have a good example here because it would go a lot more in depth than the scope of this talk, but transition areas of your kit. So for example, where the wall meets the floor or where the wall meets the ceiling, those are the places where your kit may look the most artificial. Like if you have an obvious 90-degree corner where it's just flat floor, flat wall. And so those areas in particular are where you might really focus a lot of your artistic effort to making them blend nicely, either with a shader or with an extra insert model, something like that. So for example, the trim here along the bottom of the wall helps. But if this were like ruins or something, I might also add like tiny rocks to the bottom of this so that the transition between the wall and the floor is a little bit less obvious and feels more organic. Yeah, so with that in mind, we've created modular art. Hooray. So if you look back at this hallway, again, the floor and the ceiling are just flat, but otherwise this is the same pieces, just with some fog and lighting as this. So, it really didn't take that much effort. I think the Blender render probably took longer than it took to make these pieces because I made these for the talk. But once you've made these, you can imagine making a whole building interior with these. You could even, match two of these up like this to make corners. A good tip when you have corners is to put a pillar between them so that the meeting of the corners isn't obvious. But yeah, so you can make a whole, hotel interior or whatever with these. A tip about that that is important to talk about is that the grid is your friend. Whatever 3D program and game engine you're working in, you want to make sure that when you're designing the edges of your modular kit and the dimensions of the pieces, that they line up to predictable grid intervals. So every meter, maybe every half meter, something like that. You can think of this kind of like the Lego studs. The reason that you can put Lego together easily is because, it has these studs on the top of every piece and on the bottom of most pieces. Well, studs on the top of most pieces, studs on the bottom of every piece. So that when you put them together, they match up exactly. And the grid in your 3D piece is going to be doing the same job as long as you align all your walls to the same grid line, let's say 3 meters forward, and then you line up all the walls there, they should be seamless. And if you didn't have a grid and you're just manually aligning them, you get a bunch of tiny misalignments and, it would just be very tough. Another reason you might do that is because having regular sizing lets you arrange things in combinations more easily. So for example, if you have like we talked about with the half wall and full wall example in Echoes of the Eye, two half walls makes a full wall. And so you can use those combinations to create more shapes than if, you had like a 6 meter tall wall and a 4 meter tall wall, and you could never like put the 4 meter next to the 6 meter wall and have them like match up. They'd always be different heights. So, just sizing things regularly, predictably, in ways that make sense to everybody lets you arrange them in particular ways. And when you need to get more into detail, you can make smaller kit pieces and all that. You might be working in programs other than Maya or Blender, but these are the programs that I have experience with, and so I wanted to talk about some grid tools with them real quick. So for both Maya and Blender, these are places where you can input a number to move something over a specific grid amount. So for example, if you made a wall and needed to copy it over 1 meter and then 1 meter and then 1 meter, this is called the channel box in Maya. It's called the transform something in Blender. I'm not sure exactly, but you can input numbers here to move them specific amounts. And then right here, it's usually designated by these magnet icons. This is grid snapping. So when you're moving an object or even moving a face or a vertex, you can look at these examples, or you can look at these menu options to match your parts up to the grid, which will make your life so much easier than trying to manually align it. Lastly, grid spacing options in Maya. You go display grid and then click on the little option square and you'll have this option. In Blender, it's just a drop down towards the top right of the screen by default. And you can change the scale of the grid because, maybe if you're making a distant castle, you might be working with a 4 meter grid. Whereas if you're working with like, I don't know, maybe a tiny puzzle that you built out of modular parts, it might be like, a couple centimeters per piece. So yeah, just, think about your grid size, match it up with the modular kit. It tends to be useful. Another thing I'll talk about really quick after I get a little drink is other kinds of modular pieces. I have talked a lot about walls and floors and ceilings, but those aren't the only things you can make. Here is an example of some more of our architecture kit in Echoes of the Eye. We have these pillars, doorways. You saw the roofs before. Floors with holes in them for an elevator to go through. I have 2 different kinds of half floors. This little bracket to add interest. This is a corner roof, that kind of thing. I'm just showing these to indicate that like, hey, a lot of things can be modular. They don't necessarily need to be rectangles. You can design a whole kit with a lot of variation thoughtfully if you create things that have these regular spacing and can match up with each other and be combined. Okay, let's see. Sorry about that. Okay. Another example here is this is a drawing done by a fellow artist of mine who mentored me at Mobius named Gus Lambrechtson. This was a drawing of how we're going to make our modular bridges. So you can see the archways and the stilts supporting them. They made this concept in 2D to plan out what we're going to create before putting it into 3D and making sure that the designers signed off on it. So, to you concept artists in the audience, modular kits can be for you too. It can be really helpful to a 3D modeler to have a breakdown like this. For example, because Gus is really thoughtful, you can see this brighter green, it's the middle roof pieces. But then for the edges where the roof, it kind of is angled a little bit, they colored it differently to indicate that that's a different piece so you can tack on to the end. Yeah, so here's a real life example of some modular concepts. All right, so we have talked about, in a very simple sense, how to make modular models. That sounds kind of weird, but we haven't talked about how to make modular textures, which are just as important because unless your textures are really, really simple, let's say you're working with more realistic materials, you're going to need not just your models, but your textures to match up when you put the modular pieces next to each other. So again, here's some environments that I've shown earlier in the talk. Here's some tiling materials that I've used. These are all modular. So let's talk about some examples of what modular textures are and how they can be used in a kit. So these are all examples from Outer Wilds. I, for this talk, have thought of about 5 examples of modular textures, types of modular textures that you can use. The first is going to be tiling textures. I'm guessing most or all of you who have worked in 3D have dealt with tiling textures at some point. You've probably used them a lot. For those of you that haven't, a tiling texture is a texture that's seamless and repeatable, no matter how big or small it is. So, for example, a ground texture is often a tiling texture because it might repeat 100 meters off into the distance, but it looks like one seamless shape. And I have slides for all these, so I'm going to go over them quickly first, but then also in a little bit more detail. Another type of modular texture would be a texture atlas. So that's the one over here. This is a texture atlas for some Hearthian structures in Outer Wilds. Essentially, this takes tiling textures and arranges them in a grid so that you can place multiple objects in the different material swatches. Another one is trim sheets. This was used to add detail to some of our modular pieces. You can even see it in some of the props here. These little carved details were placed with essentially a strip from the trim sheet that was kind of tacked onto the model. So this lets you add detail where it might not be modeled. Vertex blending, that's why I showed this here. For a lot of ground textures, you might have multiple textures blending softly in combination. And then material assignments, which is how we made a lot of assets in Outer Wilds with, we just have a tiling wood material, a tiling metal material, and we assign different parts of the model to those parts. So let's go in a little deeper and explain these. A tiling texture. As I said, it's a texture that's seamless on one or both axes, usually both, so going up and going sideways. These are used all the time, basically in every game. They're super reusable. This is a rock one. This is a like ground leaf cover one. And you can use these for just about anything. Basically, all the texturing techniques that we're going to talk about will use a tiling texture in some form. It just might be a specific version of it. Working with tiling textures, of course, is more of a material-based setup. And what I mean by that is if you imagine like you have a page of a book with something specific written on it, or an ornate carving, or a compass, or any kind of prop like that. You probably wouldn't get away with just using a tiling texture on that. You'd have to make a specific texture that, shows the compass rose, north, south, east, west, whatever, or the content of the book and the writing. And so for that case, you wouldn't use a repeating texture. You'd have to make something specific for that asset that doesn't repeat. But for a lot of environmental cases, especially architecture, tiling textures are great, and you'll use them a whole lot. So here, these 4 balls have tiling textures on them. I have trim sheets over here, which I'll explain later. But so, this is just a tiling metal material, painted plastic, kind of rubber, foil, that kind of thing. So the next thing I'll explain is a texture atlas. Yes, these UVs are really gross, but I will explain why they look like this. A texture atlas is a combination of multiple tiling materials into one texture or a set of textures. Generally, the reason you would do this is for performance, so that the computer has to look up fewer textures, or you have to use less memory, or maybe some of your textures are odd shapes. So what you do with this is you'd essentially create a material in Unity or Unreal or whatever engine that is your atlas, a combination of all these textures. And then when you're placing the UV islands for your model, you assign it different materials based on where you put the UVs. So for example, I put the UVs that are meant to be light wood, which is like the tops of the floor in this section. The mid-tone wood, I put all the UVs in here in this area. And again, they can overlap because it's tiling. You don't have to worry about seams. And then the dark wood, like the roofs, are placed in this area. There's a little metal piece that's right here, for example. We didn't do this too much in Outer Wilds. This set of UVs is actually for a proxy or LOD, like a low detail version of the of a lot of our buildings. But again, because atlases are good for performance, for the far away things, we use this instead of making a complex model. A nice thing about this is if you decided like, oh, actually, I want all these floor pieces to be the dark wood, you could just grab these UV islands and drag them down here, and they would look like the dark wood then. So it can be fast to iterate on. But of course, if you made the textures first for, a unique texture space or tiling, and then you wanted to change them to an atlas, you'd have to redo a lot of the UVs and move them. So generally, if you're making an atlas and making a model for an atlas, you want to be thinking about that early. But you can kind of think of it like a lookup chart or a map for different materials. Now, a trim sheet. This is kind of like a tiling texture, but it usually only tiles in one direction. So these tile left to right, but not top to bottom, and they have a bunch of different patterns. So for this, you might have strips of geometry that use each of these patterns, and this might be more believable for real life architecture where, on the top of a building, you might see like, an engraved pattern or special bricks or something every so often. So this, instead of just having, your tiling stone pattern, you can have, this blocky design or this diamond design or something painted. And you can reuse these in a lot of areas. If any of you play World of Warcraft, again, I didn't include pictures for it because I don't know if I can, but that game uses a ton of trim sheets to make almost all of their environments. If you look up on ArtStation or just Google World of Warcraft trim sheet, and then look at the corresponding environment in game, you'll probably be able to recognize where a lot of those strips end up being used. And if you're clever, you don't have to just use these on, rectangular strips. As long as the UV island is rectangular, you can put them on, for example, a circular pillar, or maybe even a curved pathway, as long as you unwrap it straight. So trim sheets are really useful. They're used a ton in environment art, and they're probably one of the most common kinds of textures that you'll make if you're doing environment modeling, aside from tiling textures, which are ubiquitous. Another thing I'm going to talk about, I know this looks crazy, is vertex blending. This is used really often in games for ground textures, where a lot of the other examples I've shown have a hard division between the materials. Vertex blending is a way to create a soft division between the materials. The way you would do that is you have a special shader. There are lots of tutorials for this online that compiles multiple materials and textures and chooses how much of each one to show based on the vertex color. So in this example, maybe the red channel of vertex color. Oh, to quickly explain vertex color, in case you don't know about it, when you make a 3D model, every vertex, aside from having position information for how the model is shaped, has color data. Usually by default, that color data is white or black, but for doing techniques like this, you might make use of those colors and paint into it in engine to produce specific results. So again, you can look up tutorials for that. I don't want to go over time and explain all of how this works, but here's an example of a ground texture with a vertex blend in Outer Wilds where the red might be stone and the green might be grass, and where the green and the red meet, it makes yellow, and that is like kind of halfway between stone and grass, or the blue might be the dirt. And so in your engine, you might have tools to paint your vertexes on the ground with certain colors, and that's how you'd create a huge space of terrain with softly blending textures that you didn't have to plan out in the texture side. You could create it in the engine. A fun thing about this, I'll go back to a previous slide, is you can use this for modular pieces also. So over here, where I have these floors that become a little bit more sandy, I actually had a sand texture, a sandy stone texture, and a stone texture. And I used a vertex blend here so that the stone tiles closer to the middle, where the sand was going to be falling in from the ceiling, were more sandy. Another way you can use that is just so that not all your modular pieces look the same, because you can create one piece and then put it in engine, copy it, and apply a different set of vertex colors to each piece to make them all look unique. That does have certain performance concerns, but I don't think we should worry about that right now. When you're on a project, you can talk to your team about that. It might be useful, but it's more effort intensive. The last one, and probably the simplest one that I'll talk about, is material assignment. So this is a big giant dam in Echoes of the Eye that Gus, as I mentioned earlier, made. And you can see that it has these horizontal planks, these vertical planks, and these metal sections. And these weren't made as its own texture with these patterns. Instead, for each section of the model, I selected them and assigned them a certain material in Maya. So then when I brought them into Unity, the game engine knows, okay, these polygons are assigned the metal material, so they use this. These polygons are assigned the wood material, so they use these planks. And the reason you might do that is because if you don't have time or memory or whatever budget to create unique textures for things, you can model the uniqueness in the geometry and just assign those pieces of geometry different materials. A nice thing about that is it makes the UVs really easy, because the UVs can overlap and do whatever because they might be using different materials. So trying to think of the best way to explain that. Essentially, if you're using tileable textures, you can kind of put your UV islands wherever because they're seamless. And so on Outer Wilds, we did a lot of material assignment because we're a small team. We had to make a lot of things. So our UVs were actually really fast, because as long as we unwrapped things, in a flat rectangular way, we didn't have to worry about packing our UVs and not having things overlap. We could just put them, wherever at the right size and tile the textures as you want. And then last thing, these different techniques require different UV layouts to work. Here's an example with my modular piece where these broken edges have the same UVs as the edges of the intact wall, so that when they're put together, the texture is continuous over them and seamless. So, you're going to do different UV techniques for different modular textures. Whew, okay. I think I've been talking for a long time, so I'm going to go relatively quickly through these tips and takeaways. But these are just some last things to remember. Like I've said many times, art that can be used in multiple ways lets you make way more stuff. We couldn't have made this cool space station in Echoes of the Eye without making things modularly. So a lot of these trees, for example, are the same tree model. This metal for the solar sails is a tiling iron material. This ground is a vertex blend. We use all these techniques to so that a lot of our effort has to be in the modeling the bricks, the pieces, the kit, and then we can arrange them pretty quickly to make a big world. Next thing, know when a modular kit isn't right to use or when to make a custom asset. For this project on the right here, because I wanted, it was very small, it was just a tiny ruined section of a building. I didn't have a lot of repeating assets and I wanted them to be a very specific shape. So for that one, I didn't make a modular kit. I just manually created each of these ruined shapes, because if I had made this ruined corner for a pillar and then only used it once, like, why build it modularly? Better to just make it once and use it and move on. The other example here is this is from Echoes of the Eye. So a lot of these building pieces, of course, are modular kit parts, but these slanted bridges between them are not. These bridges are all custom made, and that took weeks or months and a lot of effort. But the reason they had to be made custom made is because Outer Wilds is built on a sphere. A lot of the environments don't match up on an exact grid. And so while each individual room or structure might be on a grid, transitions between them are not. And so you might have like a weird 30-degree ramp with like a little bit of an upward angle connecting two grids. And so we couldn't make this modularly because there was like no way to create, a reasonable kit of ramps that would cover all these different combinations. We'd either have to move the different structures, which would be a problem for design, or make like 300 different bridges, which would be awful. So instead, these were all made specifically for each of these ones. So this bridge model only goes here, for example. And while that was really tough, I maintained that it was the right choice. Okay. One of the last tips, put things in engine early. This is an example of a giant chair that I scaled up in engine to explain that, like, hey, when you're modeling in whatever your 3D modeling program is, you might have made like a 4-meter high thing, and then when you put it in front of you in game, you're like, oh gosh, that's really huge, or that's really tiny. The scale of this doesn't make sense. So even if something isn't done, doesn't have textures on it, anything like that, put it in that engine early. Get a feel for how big it is. Walk your character around it. See what it feels like to be in that space or to match things up with each other. It will save you work in the long run. And lastly, we've talked about modular work, repeating pieces, reusing stuff. If you have extra time, you can make unique details like these books that I made for a project, but you might not. This thing on the bottom right was a project that I never finished. Sometimes that happens. We only have so much time in this world. While modular art can be a lot of copy pasting, it can let you make really big things and then save time for making the unique storytelling assets. So essentially, this is to say, just because I am talking about the virtues of a modular workflow to save time, that doesn't mean that you have to rush through it. You can use the time that you saved on modular pieces to slow down and make a bunch of specific art for story moments. Okay, so that's the end of my talk. Thanks so much. Here's my toast again. I would love to answer questions if I haven't gone over time. You can email me at this email address. This is my work email. Please talk to me, even if it's in Spanish. I can speak enough Spanish and know enough Spanish speakers that I'm sure we can figure something out. And here's my art station if you want to look at my work. Yeah, thank you. Great. So I don't know how the questions are going to work. If you guys have a microphone on your end, I would love to try to answer them. Cool. And I'm sorry if I went really fast. Again, a little bit nervous. Never done this before. Doing my best, trying to cover a lot of
Hello?
information. I hope that was
Hello?
useful.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hi. Can you hear me?
Hey, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No, no puedo. No, no puedo.
Uh-oh.
Hi, can you hear us? Hi, can you hear us?
Hi. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Okay. Okay. ¿Hay alguna pregunta? ¿Hay alguna pregunta?
Okay, so we have a question. So we have a question.
Sure.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Congratulations for your presentation.
Congratulations for your
I
presentation.
really liked it.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask about more organic elements because everything was like man-made, and I wanted to know about more natural elements.
Yeah. So like rocks and trees, or just things that aren't rectangles?
Yeah, but for example, those trees. You make the whole tree, or the branches separate and you mix them.
Got it. Yeah. So it depends. It would be more advanced, but you can totally make organic shapes out of modular parts. A good example would be if you have trees and you might switch out different roots between them. You might have different arrangements of roots that essentially have the same top edge to match up with the bottom of the tree. So you could have a modular root kit where you have, 3 tree trunks and 3 sets of roots, and you can mix and match them. Another thing would be just if you have rocks, you can kind of clip them into anything, arrange them in whatever angles. So a rock, even without edges that match up to other things, can be, essentially modular because you can put rocks together to create a cliff. Does that kind of answer your question or not quite?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other
Yeah,
questions?
we have one more question. We have one more question.
Great.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering because I think that modular pieces are interesting to work with, but I guess that they can be kind of a nightmare, with performance or maybe physics from the engine side. So have you ever encountered that problem while developing any of the environments or modeling your models?
Yes, absolutely. Um, so a funny thing about that, Outer Wilds wasn't meant to ship on the Xbox originally, and part of the reason for that was, Outer Wilds is a moving world, and so we had a bunch of nested objects and a bunch of modular pieces that, as they're moving around in the world, it took a huge amount of time for the game to calculate where everything would go, and so it was running at like 7 frames per second or worse on Xbox. Um, and we did 2 things to fix that. One was, well, okay, we might have done the batching before, but to explain this more clearly, one thing is that was a bug in Unity that they fixed on their end to help us have nested transforms, like, different objects placed within each other not take up so much performance. But more importantly, and to answer your question, there is this thing called batching. And what batching is after you've built things in the engine, there are ways to combine those pieces essentially at runtime such that they're considered one piece. So like in your Unity editor, when you hit play, your 16 wall pieces will be combined together to be one big arranged wall piece. So we batched almost all of our buildings together, for example. And so that means it just has to be one moving object instead of 32 or however many. Does that
Yeah,
help?
thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Okay, we have one more question.
Awesome.
Hi, do you hear me? Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I have a question regarding the environment. Apart from the assets and all the modular assets, the environment, the terrain, how do you manage that? Because in otherwise, the terrain is a sphere,
Yes.
and how do you manage that? Firstly, you put the
Yeah.
assets and then the mountains and the terrain. You put the terrain and then the assets. I have this
So
question.
yeah, that's a tough one for Outer Wilds. The way most game engines do it is what's called height map terrain. You might have worked with it. You have a flat plane and you can paint on it to kind of raise cliffs or push in like a lake or a basin. But like you said, Outer Wilds is on a sphere, so we couldn't do that because a height map is a flat surface. So instead, what we did was we modeled simple but curved shapes for all the terrain. Generally, the designers would make the basis for the terrain. So, for example, with a cliff, you might imagine like kind of an archway. And then what we would do is we would subdivide those models that were the correct shape a bunch, and then use tiling textures, especially normal maps, to project detail onto that geometry so that your rectangular arc gets distorted with like rocky patterns and things like that. So essentially, we use tiling textures and basic shapes to create our own terrain because we couldn't do a height map terrain like other games.
Okay, thank you very much.
For sure, thank you.
Hi there. Thank you, John, for the presentation. It was lovely. Especially, I don't come myself from a 3D background, but I've been doing modular kits myself without knowing, so like using them in the way you explained them, and it was really enlivened to see the techniques that I could use myself to, I don't know, work on that more. But my question was not on this line. It was on what's to your left, like that blue pile of things. It was intriguing me. It seems like a stack of Herdians, but it could be Sullivan or the Godo creature. So please enlighten us once again with this one.
Yeah, nice job. You've actually identified both of them. So above, over there, on the top, the big blue head is a Harthian. And then on the bottom, those are a bunch of Sullys from Monsters, Inc., which it sounds like you correctly recognized. My brother, I have a twin brother. We grew up collecting Sully plushes, and so that is where the Sully plushes have ended up. So I love plushies, so yeah, that's why they're there.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. I love your room.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so it looks like we don't have any more questions. We really appreciate your time. Please give an applause for John Oppenheimer.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad I got to do this. This was so much fun. Muchas gracias.